Welcome to my podcast, 13 Reasons Next Gen, with me, your host, Tori, where I will be talking about two teen dramas, Degrassi, 13 Reasons Why, and their depiction of mental illness throughout the runs of the show. I will also be talking about the appeals of teen dramas and teen drama history and all about teen dramas, because this is the teen drama podcast to go to talk about two amazing teen dramas that have really big fan bases. The teen drama show's genre has been one of the biggest television genres of the decades. One of the biggest teen dramas was Degrassi. Degrassi was a Canadian cable teen drama that aired on the Family Channel, which the show was based on a high school. The show has never shied away from airing controversial topics in the show's history. The show started in the 80s and went to the 2010s and then actually went to Netflix for a couple of years so that they could reach more of an audience. There was going to be a reboot, but they never ended up doing the reboot recently. They were different from other teen dramas at the time. Degrassi actually used characters that were teenage age, so you got to see them when they were like 15 to 18 when they actually graduated high school, and some of them even got to go into the college years. And then the other show I want to talk about is 13 Reasons Why, is a Netflix original show which was produced by Selena Gomez, and it was only on Netflix so people could binge watch it. And that story was told for a younger audience, and it aired for only 3 years from 2017 to 2020. There was actually 4 seasons, and it was based on a book, which I found out while doing research for this project by Jay Asher, and it followed the suicide of Hannah Baker and how everyone reacted to that. And before we talk about the reactions to people, I would like to talk about the appeal of the shows. The appeal of teen dramas is to prepare teenagers for the real world. There are different themes in the shows that make them more relatable to the audience based on the race of the characters, the gender of the characters, and the sexuality of the characters. One of the other authors from one of the articles I read, The Asses, talked about how teenagers struggled mentally after watching the show 13 Reasons. And I thought this was very important to mention as, first of all, it's the other show I'm talking about, but with this show being on in 2017 to 2020, it was important to talk about this. The Asses says that the approval of others was a theme for young women that took from the show. And there was a line that says, "I am nobody without approval." This message is that women need somebody in their lives to have a fulfilled life. And the time that this show came out, that being a theme just blows my mind, because we're now at the point where women are changing, where they don't need someone else to have a fulfilled life. They can have a fulfilled life on their own. If Degrassi had this in the beginning, I would be like, well, it was the 80s. When it came out, that makes sense, but like they never really had this, that they needed a man. And the author also argues, therefore, we believe that women objectify. The show had a lot of objectifying of women, and that how Bryce's character in one of the scenes I saw was like making out with his girlfriend in the pool house, and like that was like a storyline for her, was how much the show objectified the women. Burning has also argued now that the hero in teen dramas have changed. They used to be masculine and the women were the ones in distress. Today they have heroes in the lead and how they fight against the patriarchy in teen dramas. Burning argues that deliberately showcases women suffering under the patriarchy, which I've seen in both of the shows, this idea of how the women are the ones who are struggling because of the small little stuff, like the principals were both men in the show and they would make rules about the women's bodies and just how the women weren't treated right, like Hannah Baker wasn't really treated and seen by the principal, and also different female characters in Degrassi were the same way. So I thought this was a perfect line to mention, because even though these shows were kind of still on at the same time, Degrassi started in the 80s and you got to see the real suffraging of women. You saw it in 13 Reasons Why with Hannah Baker and Jessica and the other females, but I really saw it more in the beginning of Degrassi, and then it changed because throughout the show, because the world was changing at that time. So I thought that was an amazing quote to have. One of the authors of one of the articles I read, Burning, argues what women are like in teen dramas. There has now been a change in the protagonists of the female characters in teen dramas. In the beginning, they were more helpless, sexualized through it, but with 13 Reasons Why, you get to explore the anger, depression of what women face, especially in the sexual violence storylines, because in the past, they've been more, you see it happens, it's more their fault, what they wear, now you get to see it more, and 13 Reasons Why has shown it with the character of Jessica, and you get to see all the levels of rage she went throughout the whole season of what happened to her. Later on during this project, I looked more closely at the shows, and especially Degrassi. For them having so many characters who showed depression, I wanted to compare one of them who was like one of them from 13 Reasons Why, and I found Darcy. And I remember Darcy a little bit, and I remember how Darcy's characteristics were very much like Jessica's in the beginning, of how they were good girls. She was very Christian. She was on the cheer squad, and then she was later raped at a party because after a fight with her boyfriend, she went to go get a drink, and someone spiked her drink, and because of this, she was later essayed. And then what also happened to Darcy was her boyfriend, once again, decided to have sexy pictures of her and put them on her MySpace type of thing for the show, and the show shows the effect of that. And you see her anger with Simpson, who is the principal at Degrassi High, and how you show all the same characteristics. And also in Degrassi, I remember for the MySpace storyline, you saw how Degrassi went there, and they actually showed the storyline of a grown man coming to Darcy's house with the little sister Claire, who is also a character later on, and you see that effect. What I also found out when I was doing research for this project is the statistics of female teens who are taking antidepressants have increased. The years that statistics took place was 2015 through 2019, which was the time where I think both of the shows were running, so I think this is important to mention. There have been higher risk of women taking antidepressants than men. In 2015, 7% of girls, teenagers, took antidepressants. In 2019, it increased all the way to 10%, which is astounding to me because only in 2 years it went up 3%. Now, for this project, I decided to interview 2 people. One of them is Shannon Garland, and the reason why I chose Shannon is because I know her very well, and I know that she is an avid fan of teen dramas, so I decided to interview her on her perspective. Now, I couldn't interview Shannon in person because of her living far away, so I sent her the questions and then beforehand. So this is Shannon's response. So she's Shannon Garland. She's 20 years old, and she's a junior at the University of New Hampshire. And then I asked her, have you ever watched teen dramas, and if so, what ones have you watched? And she said, I've watched many teen drama shows, including 13 Reasons Why, One Tree Hill, Degrassi, and many more. And then I asked, as a fun question, what's her favorite? And she said definitely One Tree Hill. And I know One Tree Hill was her favorite because growing up, we actually went to Wilmington, and her and I were the avid fans, so we got to see the show locations, and that was so cool. A little tangent. And then I asked thoughts on mental health shown in teen dramas, and she said, I think properly addressing mental health is more recent in TV shows. Although some shows covered mental health in the last decade, it was few and debatably not well executed. And then I asked her, do you think there should be a trigger warning in front of the teen dramas? And she said, I think some shows cover it really well. Intense topics such as suicide, eating disorders, and bullying should include a trigger warning because they are sensitive topics that the audience can relate to. And then I asked her, personally, do you think mental illness has a positive or negative effect when they're shown in teen dramas? And she said, generally, I believe any chance to limit the stigma around mental health and reaching out is a good thing as long as it's done the right way. For the audience to relate without feeling triggered about the topics covered. I think a lot of teens can relate to having experiences with those issues, and it's a good thing for them to see representation. And I loved how she said, especially mentioned when during the interview, the stigma around mental health, because that's something that I think recently is being more talked about. But for me, deciding to do Degrassi, The Early On show, it did talk about the stigma really early on, which most teen dramas don't do that, so I loved how she mentioned that. And then I asked her, do you think watching teen dramas affected what you're exposed to as a child? And her response was, I think that there are some things that I learned as a teen affected me because, like a lot of teens, I did a lot of the comparing to teens portrayed in the shows, thinking about what was the ideal look. And that's ironic that she said that, because during my lit review, that was one of my topics, was the ideal look. And I didn't even tell her that, so I thought that was pretty amazing. I was like, wow, family connection, brain together. And then she also says, I think when teens watch teen dramas, they think that their lives will be similar to the ones on TV. The TV shows are dramatized and not necessarily realistic. And then I asked, then I got more into the specifics of the shows. So first I asked, have you watched them? And she said, yes, I have watched both shows before. And then I asked, did they have an effect on you? And she said, I think 13 Reasons and Degrassi definitely had some emotionally heavy scenes involving suicide, bullying, toxic relationships, etc. I think that although it's important for representation, I know that with 13 Reasons Why first came out, it didn't have a proper trigger warning, and the content is very sensitive to some of the audiences that didn't know about the episodes. And then I asked her about, what are your opinions on 13 Reasons Why cutting out the graphic scenes? Because if you didn't know, 13 Reasons Why did that, is that they cut out the dramatic scenes of the show. And she talked about how she had a hard time watching the graphic scenes for the first time. She mentioned, I watched the series, I'm not sure, there were people watching that had much more sensitive reactions than to what she watched. I think overall, they should have done a better job warning the audiences about certain scenes that were coming, especially with Hannah's suicide in the bathroom scene. Then I asked her thoughts about Hannah Baker being a punchline, because the reason why I asked this is because I remember when the show came out, they used Hannah as 13 reasons, this is my 13th reason, as a punchline. When someone didn't like something, they used her suicide as a punchline and a little gag. So I asked her, Shannon, her thoughts about that, and she was like, it was sad following Hannah's as the main character through the series. Although she made mistakes, it seemed like she kept going wrong for her thought. The series leaning towards it. For the audience, some things didn't seem that big of a deal, such as the boy not liking her back or losing a friend, but as they piled up through the show, it got to be too much, especially as a high school and teenager to handle. And Shannon mentioned her idea about how it got too much for her, and I think that's important. And then I said, Degrassi didn't show their suicide scene, whatever you compare that to 13 Reasons Why, because she's seen both of them. And she said, I think that Teen Nick, the station that Degrassi aired here in America, knew their audience at the time and thought it was too sensitive of a topic to air on TV. This was roughly a decade ago that it aired, so a lot of the topics that are normalized in television now were not normalized then. And I agree with her on this, but I also think it is important to mention that I think Canada has different laws than what they can show on television. And also Degrassi was made by a TV teacher, as I mentioned before, so I think they knew the effect. So I think putting all of this together, and I do agree, but I think about what she said about Teen Nick, but I also think that they knew their audience, because before it aired on Teen Nick, it aired on the Family Channel and Netflix, and they just never put it in to begin with. So I think that's something. And then one of my other questions was, Degrassi ran much longer than 13 Reasons Why. And her response to that was, I think 13 Reasons Why did poorly. So she's talking about the negative press, that the show did get a lot of negative press. So for Shannon to mention, it was executed poorly, and they ended up having very serious content throughout the whole show, and they weren't prepared for it. That's why she think it didn't run longer, and I agree with her on that, about how poorly it was done. But I also think that the other reason why it didn't run so long, and maybe Shannon would feel the same way if she was here, was that because it didn't run as long, because Netflix knew that people have a shorter attention span. So maybe it got 4 seasons because that's what they planned, because a lot of teen shows only run for 4 seasons because they know like people grow up during that time, so they get rid of the show as soon as to move on to another show for another new generation. And then the final question was, as I mentioned earlier, Degrassi is a Canadian show, so I mentioned, do you think that had an effect? And she said, versus Hollywood, because I think teen dramas in Hollywood are focused more on sex and the dramatized of teen dramas and relationships and everything being taken to an adult level, even though they're teens, versus Canada, which shows a lot of teen stuff for teens. And then she said, I feel like the shows in Hollywood are based more glamorized than Canadian-based shows, meaning they're more unrealistic for the audience. So that was my interview with Shannon Garland, who, if you couldn't tell, is my cousin, and I thought she would be perfect for this, as I mentioned earlier, because I know she loves teen dramas, and I also know mental health is very important to her as a cause. So I thought, why not ask her? Because I wanted to get someone who I know have seen a lot of the shows I've seen, and I wanted to know if our thoughts were the same versus someone else. So yeah, that was my interview with Shannon. So another thing that I did for this project is I got people that I know reaction to clips of both shows, one of them being when Cam Sanders breaks his legs, and the other one is the bathroom scene, because that obviously, as I talked before, it got a lot of people reactions from it. So my friend Denise, when I showed her the Cam Sanders scene, she remembered like watching it because she was an avid fan, and her heart like broke for Cam Sanders because like you're just seeing this character in so much pain. Brianna also, when I told Brianna in the beginning about my project, she was like, Cam Sanders, like you have to have Cam Sanders, because that storyline just resonated with people, and it's still one of the most talked about characters, and arguably people argue over his character or another character, JT York in Degrassi, who got killed in earlier seasons of the show. So those two are talked about the most. And then I interviewed someone named Shannon, and Shannon said the anticipation from each scene has me feeling for the people in the videos. It's a human instinct to sympathize with the main characters in the videos. As the audience, you want to prevent them from getting hurt, which I thought that was interesting take on both of them. And then Juliet said the bathroom scene made me feel shocked, surprised, and it was memorable. That's memorable is the word I get the most when I ask people about the bathroom scene, is they always have a story about how they reacted when they saw it. And then Elise, when I told Elise in class I was doing this project, Elise said the same thing. Like, when asked about the bathroom scene, she told me she remembered it on a school trip and how everyone on the bus would be watching the bathroom scene at the same time and how shocked they felt, and how, like, grossed out, and, like, because 13 Reasons Why really did that. They really went there, and no teen drama before have went there. But the thing about 13 Reasons Why is that they get so much negative press from it, and that the scenes actually got taken out. So the bathroom scene got taken out of the show. So I don't know how I found it online, but I did. And Hannah Baker's suicide scene got taken out because of how much negative press there was. And when watching these scenes, I think the thing that 13 Reasons didn't do is that they didn't say, like, trigger warnings. And I think if the show had trigger warnings, it would be so much different. So for the next part of my podcast, I'm going to talk about Twitter tweets, because I think the reaction from Twitter is important to talk about, because Twitter's been around for a while. So I got to see recent tweets because I went to the latest part on Twitter to see what people recently are talking about. And then I got to see tweets from like when the show came out and how people reacted to it. So for 13 Reasons Why, someone named Sav said in 2018 when the show came out, I just watched the clip from the second season of 13 Reasons Why, the bathroom scene. It made me sick to my stomach that I don't even want to watch the second season. And then another tweet said, I can't really believe they showed that and allowed that. And then someone said, yo, I'm late as hell, but the latest episode of 13 Reasons Why season 2 is insane for the bathroom scene with Tyler. Now for this part of the project, I did really want to focus more on the bathroom scene because that has the biggest reaction of a TV show, especially a teen drama that I've seen in the last 10 years. So I felt like adding that was important to my project because it just shows how 13 Reasons Why did not really think about how it would affect the audience like Degrassi did. And speaking of that, with Degrassi, someone named Degrassi Edit 21 said Cam Sanders over Hannah Baker and how Degrassi did it better. And with Cam Sanders, he was a character that committed suicide and like Hannah Baker. So for this person to say that Degrassi did it better just shows volumes over the show. And then another tweet from Eclair Fimogen talked about how it's been 10 years since Cam's suicide, but it's the most heartbreaking episode ever. We saw how he ended his life, but we also saw how it affected the school after he did it. And we got more of a storyline and an arc with like him coming there for the hockey team, him being like home alone, missing his home, and just being so alone, and how it affected everyone, especially his girlfriend, after he took his life. And then someone also said like how we took Cam's death personally and how they were freshmen in high school when he died. And on this fan on Facebook would say like blank how many days without Cam Sanders. And she even mentioned that she would update it daily. Now, during this project, I feel like I want to talk about what I've learned while doing this project is I got to go back to teen dramas while picking the shows and deciding, okay, now what shows do I want to talk about? What shows do I not want to talk about? Because I love a good teen drama. I still watch it. Actually, because of this project, I've decided to go back and watch One Tree Hill, which is my favorite one because I'm like, okay, but now, like, let's see how it is compared to the other shows. And I know I feel like I talk about One Tree Hill so much on this podcast just because I love it, but I did almost do One Tree Hill for this project, but I couldn't find any information about it. And there are other teen dramas that negatively depict teenagers and mental health. I feel like every show, especially in the early aughts, kind of did. Gossip Girl was more of the like high class society. Then there's Dawson Creek, which I never really watched Dawson's Creek, if I'm being honest, but there were some scenes when they didn't really show it in the correct way. And then there are other teen dramas that I also feel like didn't do a good job, and I feel like now they're doing a good job, but maybe now an argument could be that they're really focusing on it and that they're not showing the teens make mistakes or they're not showing the life lessons. So maybe I feel like there needs to be a balance of both of the teen dramas of, okay, you just saw this, more of learning lessons, because I do feel like teen dramas have changed. Now, finally, for this project, I want to talk about what was missing. What was missing was that I found articles about some characters, but some characters I did not. While I talk about that, I mean, Degrassi, I found stuff about Ellie, and Ellie was the only character I really found scholarly articles for, which is crazy to me because I'm like, Cam would have been the perfect person for me to find scholarly articles about, but I couldn't. So for Degrassi, maybe because it was an older show, I found a lot of articles about the show itself, and especially, I don't know why, they love to talk about the show was created by a teacher. So I do talk about that a lot in this project, which is crazy to me that that's what they focused on, but not about other information. 13 Reasons Why, a lot of the stuff I found, they didn't talk about the positives, about how the show had a fandom base, and how it was created by a celebrity. Selena Gomez produced it. So it wasn't created, but she produced it. But I thought that's what they missed, and they didn't miss about... They talked about Jess, but there was other characters I felt could have been mentioned too. And then what was missing, the biggest thing was I originally, when doing this project last year, had another show. Because I was like, okay, early odds, 10s, 13 Reasons Why was like kind of 2020s, I counted it as. And I was like, okay, one from each generation, kind of, let's do that. And the show was, of course, as I mentioned multiple times, One Tree Hill, because it's my favorite. I know the show well. I was like, it's perfect. I could just watch my favorite episodes as an excuse to watch it. I found nothing about this show, which shocks me because season 3, episode 16, there is a mass shooting. There has, with one of the characters sadly having suicide because of how he's been treated. And I thought this would be the perfect show. But there was nothing about it. And I was like, are you kidding me? So I thought about it more. I talked to people. Shout out Elise, who's helped me a lot with this project. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to get rid of my middle show, focus on one show in the earlies, one show later on in the 20s, the 2000s. I was like, let's do that. But I was like, that show would have been perfect for depression because that show does show depression, does show suicides, does show mass shootings, death, all the good stuff for a teen drama, but I found nothing. And I was like, okay, we'll take the loss, but for the what's missing, we know what it was. Then I wanted to talk about a whole different show, so all the information in Scholarly articles, there was none that I could find that would work well for this project, that would help me show mental health depiction, mental illness depiction in teen dramas. So, sadly as it was, I had to get rid of the show. You would have loved it, Westgate. One Tree Hill, I could talk all about it all day, as I did throughout this whole podcast. Even though it wasn't part of my lit review, I could talk about One Tree Hill. But I can also talk about my other 2 shows, especially Degrassi, because I've watched it multiple times when it was on YouTube. And then HBO Max bought it. And then they were going to do a reboot, but they didn't. Sorry for the little tangent, Westgate. I'm very passionate about it, but I'm also happy they didn't do a reboot because it would have failed, probably. Would have been different, just like Degrassi went to Netflix and it failed. I'm sorry, I don't mean to ramble. It just happens when I'm passionate and caffeinated. So, Westgate, that's what was missing, and also for my project. So, I hope you enjoyed it. The biggest question for my project is why people should care. And people should care because television does have an effect on the audience of what they are seeing at a young age. I vividly remember the stuff I saw as a kid and how it impacted me. So seeing the negative effects of teen dramas and their mental health and how they show depression, suicide, and all this, and body image does affect children and teenagers now, and especially affects women and females with body positivity and depression because they are shown to look like and idolize the women in the shows. But if they're seeing a woman who is struggling, then they're idolizing the wrong woman. Not the wrong woman, that's wrong to say, but they're idolizing someone who is struggling when they should take the person who is struggling more as a caution sign, I guess. More of a, this person's struggling, but look at how they're trying to get help, not, oh, this person, they should take it with a grain of salt. That's basically what I mean, is any teen who sees a show negatively done with mental health should take it as a grain of salt, being like, but this is what they could have done better. And I think that's important. I also think parents should be important about what their kid is watching at such a young age. These children are open to watch these shows because of streaming services, that they should have sit-down talks about this. I remember in one of the articles I read, it talked about, well, how these shows are being used as talking points for the parents to be like, well, you just saw this. Let me explain why it's important that you saw this. And also, I think mental health mental illness is such a strong topic today that everyone's struggling. So having shows that when you are struggling that negatively shows depiction of mental health can really affect someone. So I think that shows should be more careful about what they have and the help they should get, because if they do this, then if they get the help, then it is able for the children to understand more. And that was the end of 13 Reasons Next Gen with me, your host, Tori. Hope you enjoyed my podcast. It's been a wonderful time creating this with you. Hope you enjoyed. Follow me more for more podcasts to come for 13 Reasons Next Gen. Maybe we'll compare 2 characters. Maybe we'll talk more about the shows. Maybe we'll talk about different teen dramas. You'll never know. Have a good day, and thank you for listening.